Welcome to Three Thoughts On. Today I'm excited to have my friend Toby Redshaw with us. Toby, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for making the time. I know you're a busy man. We've been trying to do this for quite some time, and I'm truly excited of this conversation because of your background. So let's take a moment and take a few minutes to tell the audience who you are, how did you get to where you are now, and what are some of the interesting things you're working on today?
So unusual background. Born and raised in Mexico City, British parents, very multicultural background. Went to uni in the United States, but the weird part of my career is I've been just crazy lucky, but I've always had strategy, operations, and tech and innovation mixed in from the very early days of building the international business at FedEx, and then in America, in Asia, in Latin America, and then moving on to other large companies where I had the same sort of four hats. So they let me be a CIO, but also run new products. They let me run enterprise ventures and the B2B business, but also run tech strategy and a bunch of the tech, or global CIO and risk. And that's at giant big companies doing transformation like Verizon, American Express, of course FedEx, Motorola, and a giant FS company in Europe. In between, some interesting consulting, IT transformation for some of the largest companies on the planet, but always involved with innovation and startups. So as an employee, board member, advisor, chair, exec chair, I've done 45 startups, been inside 45, probably invested in 150, mostly with other people's money, Verizon's money, Amex's money, FedEx, Motorola's money when I had enterprise ventures, which is honestly the best way to invest in startups is other people's money. And I've done about a dozen boards, some not-for-profit, some B corporation, some private, one public. And the interesting part about my board journey, I think, is three or four that were just asteroid impact disasters, flameouts, where I think with conflict and difficulty and ending in company death, which I think are super valuable learning experience as opposed to I sat on a bank board for 5 years and nothing changed, right? So yeah, strange mixture of those things that don't normally get in the same bucket. I now coach about 7 startup CEOs. I'm on a bunch of tech advisory boards. I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pro bono things, national competitiveness, some science based things, the Kroc Institute for Tech Diplomacy, and I teach. I just finished doing lectures every year at Kellogg and Booth on sort of where is tech going, how do you understand that pragmatically, what does it mean strategically, how does the chain from strategy to actual getting things done work, demystifying the cultural elements of that. And I've exited those, but I still teach in this marvelous program out at the Naval Postgraduate School, where I guest lecture once or twice a year in the Masters of Science in Innovation and Design. Just a bunch of turned on, awesome people out there, and I play a.
Well, you gotta have the golf, right? You gotta have the golf. Well, thank you for that background. It's interesting. We have, and we've talked about this before. We have a similar background in telco. I spent 27 years in that field, and it's interesting how you had the opportunity. Is actually, like you said, it's very interesting to be able to see how that cycle inside big companies, right, from the investment side, acquisitions, M&As, and all the moving parts that most people take for granted.
Yeah, no, I agree. When I first got a call to go into telco world, I told the guy on the phone, I said, this is the same guy that took me to Motorola and convinced me to go to Motorola. And which might have been a mistake because my other alternative was PeopleSoft, but I didn't know it was going to get acquired by Oracle, so left all that money on the table. But the same guy, and I said, hey, you remember I'm the innovation transformation guy, right? Why on earth would I go to a telco? Because telcos were known for 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G. We're really not doing much more differently. Boxes and wires. We're huge and we're slow. And he explained two things to me. He explained to me how forward-thinking the top management at Verizon was. Lowell McAdam, who was CEO and chairman, just an awesome, brilliant fella. And he explained to me what 5G was and how telco was moving from boxes and wires and network engineering to cloud-native, software-defined, AI-intensive, big transformation. And the fact that they were willing to bring a non-telco guy to run tech strategy and then grow from there, I found fascinating. Plus the scale, right? It's 16th largest company in America, 16 billion. So that was a wonderful challenge, a wonderful build for many years. I ended up running product development, the AI business, the geolocation business, the XR businesses, all the tech strategy, the AI transformation, and build out, and I ran the Latino employee resource group, which was super cool. So yeah, wonderful place to work. And then sort of things, if you do an innovation job, it lasts 4 or 5 years, and then you've got to have conversations about, look, start selling what's on the cart. You don't need another cycle of innovation on top of this. And at the same time, competition got a lot worse, so things were tighter and stiffer. So after 5 years, but it was a marvelous 5 years working with serious pros like Matt Ellis, who was the CFO, Tammy Irwin, who was my boss for a while, Lowell McAdam, those guys. Yeah, just a wonderful place to go and do those experiments. We built the first 5G labs on Earth, which were incubators. Built about 8 of those with partners and some by ourselves. Incubated some really cool startups using edge compute and 5G. I think if I look back, one thing which ties to our conversation is people got ahead of their headlights, right? I remember I must have talked to 500 executives, C-level board, about this fourth industrial revolution idea that was coming out at the time. And I think a lot of us who were on the inside were a little overly optimistic about how fast that would come, and a little under on how big of a deal it would be. So I think it came a bit later and a bit bigger than we thought. But I was on the road a lot because these guys wanted to hear what it was. It started with 2016, 2017, Klaus Schwab, who runs Davos, right? The World Economic Forum, which was this, Davos is still huge, but 4 or 5 years ago, it was every big board had somebody there, every large company. And his big thing was, look, things are changing. We're about to go to the fourth industrial revolution. And so that was having somebody explain what's behind that and distill down his 180-page paper to a pragmatic, here's what it means at your business. That was a lot of work, but a lot of fun and a lot of great discussions across pretty much every sector you can think of.
So let's zoom in a little bit on that, because that's really the essence of what we want to talk about today, is this concept of the fourth industrial revolution. And when you and I talked last year about this topic, in my mind, I want to break it down for the audience, because when we talk about the industrial revolution, I see it as an analogous of the agricultural revolution, in the sense that if you say agricultural revolution, most people think there was only one, which was the first one, right? The 13,500 years ago. And when we talk about the industrial revolution, the average person thinks that there was just one. But in reality, we've had these steps that have been taken along the way. So can you walk us through that process and explain not only how we got to the fourth, but what exactly the fourth is?
Yeah, so I think that's a fantastic question, because the content of fourth industrial revolution really speaks to it's a big deal because we're calling it an industrial revolution, and why. So if you go back in time, we moved from an agrarian society to an urbanized industrial society. The whole Dickens era with some of the good and the bad that was in that. The first one was sort of 1760 to about 80 years, so like 1840, pre-Civil War era, and these are all based typically on power and impact, right? And we'd invented steam power and mechanization and how you could use water and coal to really change things and build factories and have a production in urban centers. The steam engine, all the textile machinery, railroads, the introduction of, and it's interesting because that's a network technology, right? What can you do with a railroad? Little tiny company said, you know what? If I put if I put my stuff in a catalog and I sent the catalog around, I could distribute my goods through a network on these trains. If only there was a communications network that would help me manage that. Oh, there's the telegraph. That's the beginning of Sears, which the early Sears is this strategic, genius, fantastic growth story. Now, later Sears is a case study in how not to manage a company, but so that was the first one, right? And it was slow, and it took 80 years, and as the trains moved west across the United States, it changed America. It also changed some industries, and it changed some nations, right? There was a migration of textile work to different places. Artisans sort of fell out, and large factories fell in. Then there's a little bit of a pause, and the second one kicks in, and again, this is anchored in a power thing. This is electricity, right? I'm not only using electricity in the ways we think of normally today, but also to start to create mass production and assembly lines. Those things all came together at the same time. Electricity didn't create assembly lines. That's Frederick Taylor and Ford and others, but that's a huge change. A huge change. The telegraph, of course, is big part of a big part of that one. That then turned into telephones. The internal combustion engine, big changes in steel production. The beginning of consumer goods. Second Industrial Revolution really had giant ripple effects, and it goes from 1870 to into the 20s, the 10s and the 20s of 1920. But so, for example, Britain had an empire based on the power of British steel. There was a new, smarter process invented during this time. The brand new steel industry in the Ruhr Valley in Germany and in America with people like Andrew Carnegie went, wait, we could use the new process. And this is important for today's world. When technology jumps ahead, the adoption of the new process creates new models. And basically, they were making steel cheaper and higher quality. And I wasn't the smartest guy at business school, but cheaper and higher quality, that's a pretty good combo. Yeah. So that killed British Steel. And the other thing that killed British Steel was sort of hubris, right? We're British Steel, we're world dominant. We've got so much money invested in our factories, we couldn't possibly change because we're the best, we're going to be great, we'll get through this. And cheaper and higher quality killed that industry, right? And killed that empire. For the car manufacturing world is another really great example of people using new methods, new design, new technology to kill the competition. Now, this happened in a 20, 30-year window. In an IT system AI-based world, that 2030 window is going to shrink. But here's what happened. In 1911, 1912, there are 400 car companies in America. 400. 38% of the cars on the road are electric, right? So electric cars were a big deal. 38%. A lot of them preferred for many reasons. They didn't stink. You didn't have to hand crank them to start them. The performance was competitive. Then somebody said, you know what, I can put together a better car at a super lower cost on a production line. So Ford and Frederick Taylor did that. 20 years later, there are 40 car companies, 360, 90% of them are dead and gone. And even worse, 80% of the market is now owned by 3 of those companies. So imagine any sector where that sort of consolidation happens because somebody leaps ahead using a new model with a new technology. We're going to take this electricity stuff and do something different. The ironic thing, the other thing that got invented in 1912 was the electric starter motor. So now one of the big complaints for cars, which is it's very hard to start, we made that easy. And the history of almost all technology, weapon systems, logistic systems, is they take very difficult, troublesome parts and they make them better and easier and cheaper, and they turn them into Lego. So I can take this piece of Lego called an electric starter motor and just put it in any car, and you've solved the problem. The history of IT is full of those sort of things, and we'll touch on that when we get to the fourth industrial revolution. So the fourth industrial revolution, they called it that because they look, it's gonna have the same kind of market destructive power, changing at a national level and at an industry level and at a company level, the fortunes of the players in those spaces. And they said, but it's on the back of four technologies. And the four technologies were IoT, all the XR stuff, AI, big data, and cloud, and the evolution of cloud. And back in like 2020, they said, look, if you look back 10 years at any of those technologies, it's a really steep curve, right? Where you were on IoT in 2010, or cloud, containerized cloud-based systems like Docker weren't even invented yet. AI and big data was still sort of stumbling around. If you had a petabyte of data, good luck managing that, right? It was very clunky, difficult stuff. You needed PhDs to run things. And then in 10 years, massive difference, especially XR, right? XR was nowhere in 2010, and then boom. So you look back in those 10 years, but here's what the clever people at Davos said. They said, okay, so really steep curve in the last 10 years. If you go 5-10 years into the future and look back, that steep part of the curve, 2010 to 2020, is going to look flat, and then it's going to go like this, because the 2021, 22 to 2030 changes and growth in those four things is going to be shockingly big compared to the others, right? And they said, and furthermore, what's going to happen is when you have really intelligent, really fast networks, including through the air, right? Super low latency, very quick, which is very quick response time, right? So I can do something on the edge, send it to a computer at the edge, get it back in half of a blink of an eye, right? So now you're starting to do a lot more real time. There's now compute at the edge. The telecommunications network becomes cloud native and software defined, which means it's made of the same IT stuff that the rest of IT is made. That creates a flywheel where AI can help IoT. You can get more value out of your sensorization. You can feed that into real-time XR type systems, make those way more intelligent. And the cost structure for doing AI and big data, two things happen. That cost structure gets way, way, way cheaper. There's a company in Chicago that does petabyte to exabytes that's 1,000x cheaper because they went and redesigned the model, kind of like Henry Ford did for cars. What I don't think the Klaus Schwab and the guys at the Economic Forum were completely aware of was the leap we were going to have in large language models and Gen AI, and what that would do. But that happened. So now it becomes patently true that 2010 to 2020 looks pretty flat, and even though from 2020 backwards it's a huge change, and then there's giant change that we haven't seen in that compressed of a time frame. So the scary thing about the fourth industrial revolution, which is, they call it the cyber physical revolution, which is IT and technology and the physical worlds are going to become entwined, and everything that can be networked and connected to a network will be, right? Things that in the 1950s we would have thought bonkers, right? I've got a coffee mug over there that's Wi-Fi connected and adjusts its own heat, right? A bit of a excessive thing to have, but I got one. the scary part is this is going to be as disruptive, if not more disruptive, than the first, second, and third ones. But it's going to happen in a window of about 8 years, right? And when I think I've talked to 500 board members in the last couple of years, mostly through the National Association of Corporate Directors, which is a great organization helping directors see this stuff. There's this sort of common feeling that we're going into this creative destruction cycle, but nobody thinks they're going to be on the destruction side of these cycles, right? They think, my team's smart. I'm going to get the creative side of this done, and Kodak, Sears.
That's a great example.
All kinds of really smart folks. So I do think there's a lot of destruction happening. There's also a massive acceleration on the scientific side, whether it's material science or biotech or synbio, and a lot of that is AI getting plugged into that. I think sort of the second half of this industrial revolution, Gen AI and agentic AI are going to have a huge impact. But I think what's happening underneath this is a discovery of scale, right? If you look at the scale of large language models, it's the scale of things we've never done in a very broad way at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a supercomputer at Lawrence Livermore National Labs that does work on the output from the fusion reactor, but that's a supercomputer that lives over there. We had a great supercomputer doing some really good work during COVID, accelerating scientists around the world, but these isolated pockets. We're going to be able to start modeling and working at massive scale that we haven't done before, and that's ecosystems and markets, and it might also be, cellular level, atomic level modeling inside the body, because the way your body really works, right? It's molecules and proteins and enzymes, but below all of that, at a very detailed level, it's atoms and chemistry and bonding, and modeling that is enormous, but I think we're heading to a more comfortable world with enormous. So I think there's a couple of big waves of changing. I think the rudimentary thing that gets lost in this is these new technologies. Going back to my earlier point, these things can make your cost structure better and improve your output, right? The quality of your output, the quality of your engagement, the intelligence of your system, the way you engage with people, the way you are proactive and predictive and precise and pattern matched and process performant. And again, not the smartest guy at business school, but if my cost structure is better and my output and outcomes and engagement model are better, unless I have a really bad strategy, I win, right? The secondary impact of being good at those things is that you're typically better at responding and building because you've got the modern tech. So not only am I cheaper and better than the enemy, I'm also more resilient, more agile, which is a very winning combo, which comes back to creative destruction. That's how companies get destroyed.